Okay, so I just got a little message there saying recording in progress. So yeah, I'm just going to do a sort of very informal talk about what I did for 10 years, which was working as a bird and marine mammal observer. Initially in the UK, but eventually I kind of got to various places around the world. So I put, what do I do? I actually don't do this anymore. I've moved across the terrestrial world, but it was a great job. It got me to travel the world, and I got paid for it, so it's fantastic. Part of that job was observing and recording birds and marine mammals for environmental impact assessments. So I started off in the North Sea, and I was mainly looking at sort of the impact that wind turbines were going to have on an area within the North Sea. And also part of that was marine mammal observation. So as well as birds. So we would count birds, we would then input the data, and then it would be put into final reports. But moving on from that, I also then worked increasingly on seismic survey ships. Now, seismic surveys are surveys that are done to look for oil. And we were not only looking for birds, but actually probably more importantly, we're trying to prevent marine mammals from getting too close to the vessels when they're actually working. And also part of that job was what we call passive acoustic monitoring, which was to detect and prevent marine mammals from getting too close to either piling operations or the seismic survey themselves. I won't get too technical, but that was kind of what I did for 10 years. And I also did a lot of environmental survey work along the way as well, which would get me to all different parts of the world. So depending on where in the world we are, we can see some amazing creatures out at sea, over 100 or more species of marine mammals around the world. There are more than 200 species of seabirds around the world's oceans, as well as a surprising number of land birds. Yeah, fish, turtles, insects, and things you would never imagine turn up on boats when you're working offshore. So as a marine mammal observer, I would have to scan using my naked eye and use binoculars to help the idea. I'd observe and record all marine mammals during the operations. And I'd use what they call a rangefinder stick, because we had to estimate the distance of marine mammals from the operation. The same was done with birds as well when we were doing seabird surveys. If marine mammals were recorded in what we call the mitigation zone, so that's roughly 500 meters around the vessel, then we would have to inform those people that were operating the vessel to either slow down operations or stop operations until those animals had got out of the way. And we'd also enter data onto special spreadsheets and submit reports. In the UK, they would go to government agency for sort of if there were any issues later on down the road. So this is where I spent a lot of time initially, my first 2 years, in a little box on the top of a ship, looking for seabirds. One person would observe for an hour, and the other person, that's me, looking very wet and cold, would write down everything that would be seen within that hour, and then we would change over. Just a little idea of what conditions could be like out at sea. I don't know if everyone can see this, but you'd go from force 0, which was fantastic. The sea was like a mirror. It's what we all dream of, but for the most part, it would usually be anything between a 1 and a 4. If it started to get towards a 5 or a 6, it became very difficult to observe marine mammals. You could still see seabirds. If it got to a 7 or an 8 or beyond, you were usually in your bunk and not very well. So yeah, you would go from the sublime sort of days like this in the North Sea to slightly choppier days where you might be lucky enough to see something like this killer whale going through the chop. And then you just have the ridiculous sort of situations where furniture was flying everywhere on the vessel. On one occasion, we were watching a rugby match, and there was about 8 of us, big, strong guys, all sitting on a couch. One minute we were sitting there watching the rugby, the next minute we'd been thrown across the room, up against the wall, some 4 or 5 meters away. So it can get pretty hairy out there. So now on to a little bit about the MMO work, which is marine mammal observer work that I would do from these vessels, usually seismic vessels. So one of the important things was to be able to identify species to some extent. And of course, they come in all shapes and sizes, from the smallest, which is this, which is a harbour porpoise, to slightly bigger marine mammals, such as this, which is a minke whale, what we would call stinky minke. This particular animal came so close we could actually smell its breath. It was about 50 meters from the vessel. This again is in the North Sea. The porpoise, if we go back to that, that's, some of you might know from the North Wales coast, very small. It's maybe 1.5 meters long. You know, not much bigger than a large dog really. But then the minke whale, which is probably the largest of the regular whales within UK waters, is anything up to 6 or 7 meters long, which I guess is comparable to, well, two small cars put together in line. If we're very lucky, we might get to see some other slightly rarer species. This is what we call white-beaked dolphins. They don't like to bow ride, but they would sometimes come towards the vessel. And actually, when we were doing surveys in the North Sea, we found quite a lot of these animals moving through at certain times of year. And that impacted quite strongly on where wind turbines were to be built and where we would find these marine mammals or seabirds. There's a little video here. This is the commonest, probably the commonest species of marine mammal around the world. One you don't see that often in the UK, but now I can't seem to be able to find. Oh, here we go. See if I can play it. See if you can recognize it. It's terrible video. Sorry, I'm not very good at videoing things. If anyone wants to speak up and tell me what they think that is, don't be shy.
Is it a bottlenose dolphin?
It is a bottlenose dolphin, yeah.
Okay.
Actually, I cheated with that one. That was off of the coast of Florida. But we actually very rarely saw them in the North Sea, but you do get them off of Northumberland quite frequently. Okay. Right, moving on. Yeah, so again, bottlenose dolphin, and I sort of traveled all over the world. This one was actually in the Black Sea in Romania, and they're quite common still in the Black Sea, whereas unfortunately, harbour porpoise is very much a declining species. Another thing we would look at in terms of when we were doing MMO work was the behaviour of animals, to see how they would react to the vessels, to see whether they would come towards the vessels or move away. This was a pod of orca, killer whale, east of Shetland, which we weren't firing at the time, so we weren't creating any noise in the water column, and they came very close to the vessel. They came within 200 or 300 meters. But as soon as you start putting noise into the water column, they would move away. Obviously, we would wait until they moved away, usually anyway, before we actually started to put any noise into the water column. Just to understand these seismic vessels, they create so much noise that they can basically very much confuse these animals in the water if they're close, or if they use the same sound channels. And we were one day testing some of our equipment, and there were divers in the water that said they were 17 kilometers away and they could actually hear already the noise that we're making in the water. And if we'd have carried on to the very peak level, it could have severely damaged their eardrums. So if that can damage people at that sort of distance, you can imagine how it could be for marine mammals. Again, this was actually in the Gulf of Mexico. This was a young sperm whale, and we didn't encounter many marine mammals actually within sort of 200 meters off, 200 miles south of the coast of the US. But we did see these sperm whales. But this was again before we started working, and we noticed afterwards that we very rarely saw any animals. So again, showing the impact of the work that was going on. You would also look at the group dynamics. Occasionally, I would do surveys for Natural England, and we would look at groups of common dolphin, and they were often feeding with seabirds. So it was quite interesting to see the interaction between them. And a lot of this behavior was noted down. Again, if a group of animals was coming towards a vessel and we were working, it was always interesting to see. I mean, we actually did have pilot whales come right up to vessels when we were working, which was very unusual. Usually they would go the other way. There is some cataloguing that goes on with MMO work, not so much with connection to seismic vessels, but at the time that I saw this particular orca, there was a big cataloguing event going on with all of the orca between Shetland, Norway and Iceland. So we gave our images to see whether they could find a connection between these animals. And eventually, I think there was an animal, not this particular one, where they could look at the dorsal fin and be able to tell that it was the same animal that was being seen in Iceland in the summer that was being seen off the coast of northern Scotland at other times of year. Sadly, occasionally you'll see disease on some of these marine mammals. If you look at the fin on the left-hand side of this bottlenose dolphin, you'll see that there's a growth there. Quite often you would see these, especially in waters which were quite polluted. Probably the worst that we saw was in the Black Sea, and we actually unfortunately had to record the deaths of several dolphins, which clearly had come into usually harbors, and they like coming into the harbors because there are a lot of fish in the harbors, but unfortunately there was a lot of pollutants that were coming into the water, and it would discolor their skin. So quite often you would find these animals and they were very, very, very strange colors. This is a common dolphin, which you can find in the Black Sea, but it's a different form to those that you would find in other parts of the world. So it's again very interesting to see the sort of the variations of these animals around the world. I mean, we worked in the Bay of Bengal at one point, and there are spinner dolphins there that very few people have seen and recorded, and they're probably a separate species. There's so much that we still don't know about a lot of the marine mammals in the world. So it's important that people get this opportunity to go out there and look at them, even if it isn't, proper dedicated vessels. Obviously, we'd encounter other marine mammals, such as this grey seal that came around the boat one day just scavenging. And you quite often see grey seals doing this, which is called bottling, which is them sleeping in the water. You might well have seen this off the coast of North Wales. It's quite cute to see it. So that's marine mammals. So these are just some other images. I think these were spotted dolphins. These are pan-tropical spotted dolphins. They're taken by a friend of mine. This one is a Risso's dolphin. Again, a species you can see off the coast of the UK, North Wales. We were talking about this earlier, and also down in the southwest. This is a young male. The males are very, very obvious, the adult males, because of the white foreheads that they have. This is another species that we encounter quite a lot, especially when I did surveys in the Bay of Biscay. Striped dolphin, it's one of the smaller dolphins. They're very, very fast, and they love following boats or being in front of the boats, using the bow wave. I actually did a study once on spinner dolphins, and they found that spinner dolphins, they spent a lot of money researching it, only to find out that the reason that spinner dolphins spun was because they can. This is pygmy killer whale. It's not actually related. It's the English name is sort of a bit misleading, but it does actually hunt in packs, and we were quite fortunate to see this animal in the Gulf of Mexico. They're very rarely sighted. Again, photographed by my colleague at the time, Mike Bailey. This is another species which is not rarely encountered, false killer whale. Again, that name killer whale, but it's not a whale, it's a dolphin, as indeed are orca. And this again is another species that will hunt in packs. This last image here is a brood as well, which I was fortunate enough to see off the coast of California. This was actually on a personal trip, and you can see the pitting all the way on the side of this animal. This is actually quite a scarce coastal whale, which is slightly larger than the minke whale, but very, very similar. Very difficult to identify a lot of these smaller rorqual whales, especially as they don't stay at the surface for very long. And this one, of course, is one of the largest animals on the planet, which again I was fortunate enough to see on a trip to California. That tail is probably something like 18 feet long. It's absolutely massive, and I took that photo from quite a distance. Quite a sight. Again, another close-up image, same trip, of the humpback whale, so close that these animals, you can actually see the eye, and you can see the ridges and the blowhole, and even a barnacle. These were feeding alongside California sea lions. Again, truly amazing. If you can get out to sea and see these kind of things, it's well worth it if you don't mind getting a bit seasick. I was going to quickly talk about passive acoustic monitoring, and only very quickly. So this is, again, what I mentioned before, which is something we used, especially at night when we can't see the marine mammals, to try and locate them. And we would monitor their clicks and their whistles, any sort of echolocation and other acoustic noises. And we have basically a hydrophone array, which is a microphone that you put in the water that's covered, and you tow it behind the vessel, 100 to 200 meters behind the vessel, and you listen and try and record all the marine mammals that are within sort of 200 meters. And you use a triangulation system to estimate the distance that those mammals are from your vessel, so that if they come within the 500 meter limit, then you'll be able to stop work from proceeding or delay until they're out of the area. And again, we would enter this data onto spreadsheets. So this is just a quick picture of the equipment they would use. It looks quite sophisticated, but I'm not really much of a technical person, and I could still use it. So this is the set-top box. You can see at the bottom there with the yellow cord, this is the hydrophone that would be plugged into it. This would amplify all the noise. It will be connected to these monitors where we can monitor the sounds. And then this is at the bottom on the actual, the black cable here is the hydrophone itself, which would go out at the back of the vessel. Just some example of some dolphin whistles that we can see. It can be a very boring job because all you often hear is just the noises from the vessel itself, but this is what makes it worthwhile when you get a click like this, and if you can hear it, it's even better. And as soon as you get this, you record it and you can play it back. This is this is actually a group of several hundred spinner dolphins off the coast of Africa, west coast of Africa. And you can see all of those little colored dots are the dolphins making noise within the water column. I'm going to try and play these now. They might not work, but I just want to see whether you can recognize any of these sounds. So I'll just go back, try and do that. Okay, here we go. Okay, anyone have any idea what that is? Not my recording, but
don't know. Play it again. Go.
Probably the commonest large marine mammal on the planet.
Humpback whale.
It is, yeah, humpback whale, yeah. And interestingly, they use sound channels to communicate over vast distances, literally over hundreds and hundreds of miles. Unfortunately, seismic vessels quite often use the same sound channels, and it can block their signals and interfere with their communication. And the same goes for naval vessels as well. Right, I've got another one here. These are a while since I played these, so I can't remember some of these. It's very... Any ideas on that?
Okay.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Right, let's see. Oh, don't think it like... Oh no, you can hear that. Can you hear that?
Clicking.
Yeah. That's a marine mammal making that click.
Porpoise.
Nope, much bigger.
Blue whale.
Not quite as big.
Fin whale.
No, but it dives deep.
Sperm whale.
It's a sperm whale, and that's echolocation. It's using it to try and locate squid. So I hasten to add that a lot of the recordings that we do, you don't get quality like this, and some of the things that you see, you don't actually hear. Right, I'll try and get another one up. It's very faint. So I'll let you know what that's dolphins basically, and that is kind of what you're listening for. But actually, women are actually better at picking up those high pitched sounds than men, so they make for better PAM operators. Yeah, okay, that one's a trick one.
Nothing.
It sounds like nothing, doesn't it?
I can only hear my tinnitus and the duck quacking.
Okay, so ignore the last one, but this one is not. This is, oh, sorry. Oops, daisy. So I'll just play this last one, and then that is not a marine mammal, but it is something that lives in the sea. And it's a flatfish.
All right.
Which was recorded by a friend of mine. So that blew me away when I heard that. I was like, fish make noise, but they do. There's not much research on it. Anyway, so sort of moving on, just some images of other marine life that you can see out there. When you get into tropical seas, flying fish, they're everywhere and they're amazingly colorful. You're really lucky, like I was, especially off the coast of Myanmar, you get to see turtles. We saw turtles every day, of 4 or 5 different species, and it's always a treat to see them. Sadly, they are becoming much scarcer. I did actually manage to see one very large leatherback turtle in the North Sea some years ago now, but the the guy that I was working with, who was in charge of the whole operation, he didn't believe me, and unfortunately the picture looks rather like a plastic bag, so it didn't really help with that. Again, you'll see jellyfish everywhere. I mean, the one on the right hand side there, the big white one, that was over 1 meter long. I mean, it was absolutely huge. And then you get to jellyfish like this, which have these stinging tentacles, which, you know, can go on for like meters. You'll get amazing predatory fish. This fish on the left hand side came right down the side of a vessel one day when we were out in the Bay of Bengal, which was probably a marlin, but it was very quiet. But often you'll see things like the sailfish there on the right hand side just swim past with their fin up, or they'll do jumps rather like that that black marlin sort of in the bottom right hand corner. They're always pretty impressive. And then you'll see things like rays. This is a short fin devil ray, which you can't really tell from that picture, but that's 4 meters wide, and it's hardly ever been seen. In fact, it's never been recorded off the coast of Myanmar where we saw it. Obviously manta rays, and then this is an oceanic white-tip shark, which is one reason why you don't always get in the water, especially when you're in deep water, because you never know what's going to come up and check you out. Sea snakes was a bit of a constant issue in the Indian Ocean, so again another reason to stay out of the water, although they don't usually attack you unless they're cornered on land. So and then you get, well, just random things like, yeah, large fridge freezers floating. This was in the North Sea one day. I think we used to compete with each other when we were really bored to see who could come up with the most ridiculous thing. And the most ridiculous thing anyone ever had was a cow floating past on one particular survey. We do get other things like, yeah, sunfish, which are fantastic. And of course, you can see these in the southwest, maybe even off the Welsh coast occasionally. Always a pleasure to see, massive, and basically people know very little. They've only just discovered there's a second species as well off the coast of California. You might get random things coming onto vessels like grasshoppers, insects. This is part of an invasion we used to get in the Black Sea, in the Caspian Sea as well. And then, yeah, on slow days, you'd be looking for various types of insect. And then you would record and log these as well, just out of interest, especially when I was working in Kazakhstan, because we were working close to islands that were being colonized slowly by insects. So it was quite interesting. And then you get random things like this serotine bat, which just turned up one day on a vessel, or this party color bat, which one of the Filipino crew sort of ushered me to come and see. He showed me basically what looked like a broom, and then he moved the broom aside, and this was just resting behind the broom. This is actually a long distant migrant bat, which has been recorded flying across the North Sea. A colleague of mine actually found one on a vessel. This was actually in the Black Sea. And then occasionally we've had to rescue bats as well. This was a little pipistrelle bat we had to rescue on one occasion. Usually I'd have a break at this time, but I think you're just going to go through and then have a break at the end. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So on to seabirds. So I started off as well as a seabird surveyor, and you do something called European Seabirds at Sea, and you have to do an assessment. And during that assessment, you have to prove that you can identify the birds and that you're able to count the birds. So this would be a typical scenario when you're in the North Sea. When we used to survey, we would have to survey up to a distance of 300 meters, and we'd have to survey within distance bands. And within each band, you would have to tell the other person that was with you what species there were, how many there were, what behavior there was, and also what the plumage was of each of those birds, what the age was of each of those birds, if possible. So it could be quite, although we were only going at 10 knots, if we got a group of 500 or 600 mixed seabirds, it could be quite challenging. So obviously, yeah, gannet is probably the commonest in the North Sea, and it's always a good indicator species, actually. If you saw a lot of those feeding, it was usually a good area for other seabirds. And you would be looking at different forms of feeding, as I said. So surface feeding like this fulmar, or you might look for your Manx shearwaters again. Obviously, these species are probably more common in North Wales than they are sometimes in the North Sea. And you'd be looking for any behavior that would indicate whether they're feeding or just passing through the area. Because again, this was important when you were looking at developments, and even today, it's still something that's quite important. I think off the coast of Wales at the moment, there's quite a few schemes to put more wind turbines in, mainly off the west coast. So you get your lovely little puffins. You would also, again, look at what they were doing. Quite often these birds would just pop up right in front of you. And you would have to very quickly sort of have a look at the age of this bird and describe what it was actually doing. There is a period during the summer in the North Sea when, unfortunately, your auks become flightless and they can't fly. And so they would just flop around like this, poor guillemot, just trying to escape the vessel. None ever got harmed, but it was always quite amusing to watch them sort of come up and then be a bit shocked when they were about 10 meters away from a vessel. But it was also interesting to see them raft in large numbers for protection when they were not able to fly, and also feed together as well in that way. We also looked at birds and their behavior as associated with the vessel. If something like this kittiwake was associating with the vessel, we were not able to count it. But if it was away from the vessel and feeding, we would be able to count that within our count, and then that would contribute to the data on the site. You quite often get birds just chilling, like these razorbills. But another interesting thing is that you would often see during the nesting season, the adults would come out and they would bring, usually the males, and they'd bring the chick out. And the chicks were not well grown. They would quite often be very, very small. And these chicks have swum all the way from the colonies. Most of these colonies were Flamborough on the east coast, and they would swim something up to 60 miles to get out to areas where they would feed. And they would do it within a matter of days, which was quite phenomenal, really. And here we have a guillemot with a little chick. You can see how tiny this chick is. And this is, again, as I say, some 60 miles out at sea. You would also have to be able to distinguish birds outside of the summer, and that could be quite tricky when you had birds that were diving very, very frequently. But here you have, you know, an example on the left-hand side. Can anyone tell me what that species is?
Razorbill.
Correct. And on the right-hand side?
Puffin.
So again, it was this question of being able to ID birds in different plumages, and that would all add to your sort of knowledge of what birds were using the area. I can't remember why I put this one in, but it's a nice picture of a great black-backed gull. Again, I think it was probably just to indicate that with gulls especially, you have a lot of different plumages, and you'd be trying to sort of go through all of those plumages to try and put down as much information as you could. Again, with this Mediterranean gull, you know, you'd have to try and work out what age it was. Anyone tell me what age that Med gull is?
Second summer.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that was actually in the Black Sea. Yeah, this was a laughing gull that we recorded quite frequently in the Gulf of Mexico. And then you'd have little gulls. These were in the Black Sea. There were literally thousands of these. But we found in the North Sea, when we were doing surveys, that you could get huge numbers. I think, Steve, you went to Hornsey Mere, didn't you?
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, imagine that. But I think, how many did you see there? Like a couple of thousand, or?
There weren't many when I think there was about 1,900, but there had been up to about 8,000 last autumn.
Well, you get groups like that out at sea, in the North Sea. Not every year, but they, you know, because I knew that you'd get large numbers from Hornsey, but I just didn't prepare me for the sheer numbers that you would get. And actually, the Black Sea was even more amazing. I mean, this was a survey I did across Biscay. I'm sure everyone knows that species.
Great shearwater.
Yeah, terrible photo, but this was in quite tough conditions. We're actually mainly looking for marine mammals, but this was on a day when my colleague, after about half an hour, had to go and have a lie down. So I ended up having to count thousands of great shearwaters and many other sort of birds in there. And that was a voluntary thing that we did for a group called Marine Life. If anyone is interested, they're still going. There's another group called Orca, and you can actually do, I think at the moment, maybe not so much because of COVID, but in usual times, you can actually join these groups and you can do little training courses. So you learn more about marine mammals and seabirds, and you can actually go on vessels of opportunity and you can do surveys. And that's all fed back to Natural England. And it's useful data. It really is useful data. This was a different species of shearwater that I encountered, and it was the first time I'd ever encountered it in Black Sea. Anyone got any idea?
Is it little type? Is it Barolo?
No, it's in the Black Sea. A bit bigger.
Oh, Yelkun.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Got that before me, Steve. I was just about to say.
So yeah, Yelkun, and it was quite interesting for me because I'd seen a few birds in the southwest, which I thought, oh, maybe they're, you know, you see lots of Balearic shearwaters, but then you saw these birds and you were like, oh, they are so distinctive. They look very similar to Manx, but when they're close up, they have a totally different sort of jeers, and their behavior is different. And they were actually far more of an offshore bird in the Black Sea. They would be quite far offshore. You wouldn't encounter them until you got to quite deep water. So I'm always surprised that these are sort of claimed off the southwest, because I suspect they probably don't occur very often. Occasionally you would see seabirds like this poor royal tern, which, as you can see, has got something sticking out, a fish hook that's sticking out at the bottom there. And another, actually, I think I might have got that. That's a Caspian tern, apologies. Royal tern with fish. This again was in the Gulf of Mexico. So again, terns are quite difficult to sort of, as you can tell, because I just made the mistake of calling that royal tern, to differentiate, especially when they're flying over at speed. But yeah, we'd record these within the Gulf of Mexico when we were doing surveys. And occasionally we'd get on all these surveys special birds like long-tailed squirrel, which would turn up, which was always a pleasure to see. And then you get trickier birds like this. This was in the Gulf of Mexico. Can anyone help with that?
Pom skewer.
It is a pom skewer, which obviously the tail can tell you that, but it's a rather tatty looking bird. When you're in the North Sea and in the Northern Hemisphere, you get used to seeing birds in a certain way, but as soon as you get into areas which you're not familiar with and you get birds in winter plumage or non-breeding plumages, it gets quite tricky. That's not too bad because it still had the spoons, but yeah, just a great skewer just for variety. This was in Mozambique Channel. Anyone tell me what that is?
Red-footed booby.
Yeah, it is, yeah. And these birds would actually come and join, and this happened quite a lot in tropical waters. They were looking for vessels which they could then use to fish from. So it would actually, brown boobies did this a lot more than red-footed, but they would actually stay on the front of the bow, and as we started moving, they'd wait for the flying fish to come up, and then they'd catch them. Very impressive birds. But you quite often in rough weather as well, got these birds coming and sitting on heli decks and just generally chilling out. There's a brown booby. This was in the Gulf of Mexico. This one was one where it had made an unsuccessful attempt to try and get a flying fish, I think. Another species of booby.
Masked booby.
It is a masked booby. This was in the Indian Ocean. This was a long way out. This was like 50 miles out at sea. It was quite a surprise. Quite often you'll see these birds on their own, and the difference between being in the northern hemisphere in sort of or in the very southern hemisphere, you get lots of seabirds. Is in tropical waters you might only see 4 or 5 birds in a day, and they're often just on their own, just like out there hunting, looking for opportunities. But you would often see this is a Mediterranean shag. This is a scarce subspecies. Certain species, especially frigate birds, which would go up quite high looking for feeding opportunities. They'd be looking for groups of birds which they could then join to try and parasitize and take the fish. This was off the coast of California. Can anyone tell me this one?
Black-footed albatross.
It is a black-footed albatross, yeah. It's one of my favorite species. Yeah, they're not actually something that we encountered very much doing surveys, but most of the surveys were unfortunately not in the right areas. But they have a tendency to follow boats as well, quite a lot. This one was actually being chummed, so that's why it's so close. Terrible picture of anyone know?
Double-crested cormorant.
Yeah, one worth looking out for, even in the UK. They quite often would come quite close and fish around the vessel. And so would these guys. Anyone know what this is?
Brown pelican.
Yeah, so quite often, again, like the boobies, they would come when we're in the Gulf of Mexico. We'd be 200 miles out, and these birds would just turn up out of nowhere and land on the front of the vessel and just hitch a ride and dive for fish every so often. Or they'd use thermals on the side of the vessel to ride and then dive looking for fish. This is one of the frigate birds that I was talking about earlier. It's actually a magnificent frigate bird. And they have this habit of just following the vessels if there are other seabirds around, or just spiraling way up high. And it's even been sort of found now that they actually go over land at very high heights in order to cross. I think it's in Asia. They've worked out they've got a land route which they use. They're incredible seabirds. Now, this is not my image, but this was quite a good find that we had in the Gulf of Mexico. Anyone know that one?
Is that white-tailed tropic bird?
It is a white-tailed tropic bird, yeah. These are probably, unfortunately, I don't have any great images, but these are one of my favorite seabirds. tropical seabirds. They're just so incredible, really. And they tend to be really out in the middle of nowhere. And again, away from the breeding colonies, there's not that much known about how they feed. But it wasn't always about seabirds. We'd quite often get, especially during the autumn and the spring, migrants. Can anyone tell me what these are?
Common scoter.
Yeah, you should know, because you've got plenty in the bay there in North Wales. So we quite often record ducks at sea. We'd record raptors like this. This was not in the UK, I hasten to add. It's the Gulf of Mexico. Can anyone ID that?
American kestrel.
Yeah. So this was interesting behavior again. We would see raptors just turn up and they would stay with boats for days at a time. Bear in mind, we're 200 miles out at sea, and they would hunt around the boats, picking off passerines that landed on the boat. And on one occasion, we had a peregrine, I think there might be a picture, that just picked off a American purple gallinule and was like tearing it apart as it flew over the vessel. So you'll see things like this little robin way out at sea in the North Sea. I've watched these birds land on the water being chased by greater black-backed gulls, and then you would thought they're going to drown. And then what they seem to be able to do is just lift their wings off and then misdirect the gull and then fly off. Birds like song thrush would land on the vessel. Anyone ID this? Is quite hard on this one.
Is it a type of reed warbler?
It is related, yeah.
Is it Blythe's reed warbler?
No, it's marsh.
No.
They're really tricky. You'd often get like hundreds of these birds, and you'd just be spending all day trying to work out what they were when you were supposed to be looking at marine mammals in my case.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get slightly easier ones like this lovely little wood warbler. It's very disconcerting to see these birds. Unfortunately, you can see what happens is they start to feed on insects that are around the vessel, and they can often pick up sort of oil and things as they're doing it. Anyone know that one? Oh, sorry. In the North Sea.
Is it meadowpipit?
Yeah, very, very common, literally thousands of them. This is in the Black Sea.
Black-headed bunting.
Yeah, we saw literally hundreds of black-headed buntings. And it was very strange because I think they're coming across the Black Sea, migrating westwards. I mean, sometimes we would have weather which would push these birds across the Black Sea. And the same in the Gulf of Mexico, there would be days where you would literally have hundreds, if not thousands of birds migrating south passerines. Things like belted kingfisher, hummingbirds. I had ruby-throated hummingbird hovering in front of me on one occasion one morning, and as I came up onto the deck. This again is in the Black Sea.
Black-headed wagtail.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is a winter plumage bird. So again, we would see thousands of these. This poor little fella, he actually got caught on a fly trap, and I had to release him from the fly trap. He actually was fine in the end. Anyone want to know what that might be?
Is that a semi-collared flycatcher?
It is a semi-collared flycatcher, yeah, which was a bit of a surprise. But again, not an uncommon species. This is in the Black Sea. Obviously, if this had been in the North Sea, you'd have been a bit more excited. Anyone know this one?
Black redstart.
Yeah, female black redstart, quite a common bird in the North Sea. You'd often have roosts of swallows and house martins. I saw it many, many times, especially in rough weather, where they would come onto the vessel and roost overnight. And on one occasion, this was in the Bay of Bengal. Quite a difficult one to ID this.
House swift.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is a house swift. So we were 30 miles out, way away from land, and it just decided it was going to land, or not land, but it just came around the top of the vessel, was circling us for about an hour, and then just disappeared again. Especially in the Gulf of Mexico, we saw a lot of these.
Grey blue heron.
Great blue heron, yeah. So again, massive numbers of these birds go across the Gulf of Mexico and end up in the Caribbean for the winter. I don't think I was quite prepared for just how many birds do migrate across open water. It still fascinates me. And you get sort of the comical guys like this, which are now spreading throughout the UK.
Cattle egret.
Yeah, and in fact, this species probably used boats to colonize South America and North America as well, but especially South America in the 40s and 50s, I guess, when shipping was getting to the point where, you know, there were so many ships that it was inevitable that they would cross. And you'll see like cattle egrets are probably the one bird I've seen everywhere in the world on boats. Another one just turned up one day. So you get
Eurasian curlew.
Say again, sorry.
Curlew.
Yep, the juvenile curlew that landed on our boat in the North Sea. Strangely, you would get waders landing quite often on vessels. Another one.
Ooh, is it a Dunlin or is it Western Sand?
That's a good question, but it's
Western Sand?
No, it's not. It's
Yeah.
No, it is in the North Sea, but they're quite tired quite often. I mean, you often see waders on the boat, but I've had a kestrel land next to me. I've seen bramblings sitting on someone's lap while they're looking at their cell phone, and they don't even realize it's sitting on their lap, you know. It's crazy, really. This was in the Gulf of Mexico again. I was saying a lot of raptors would land on the vessels.
Merlin.
It is a merlin, yeah. And this one hung around for a couple of days. And then, for me, quite special birds.
Shorted owl.
Yeah, of course, shorted owl. And again, this is shorted and long-eared owls quite often use boats. And obviously, when you're birding on the East Coast, you quite often see them coming in off the sea. And on some days in the North Sea, you would see 7 or 8 short-eared owls circling around vessels. You know, they land on oil rigs a lot as well, just resting up until they can carry on. You get random birds which you wouldn't expect to see out at sea. Wood pigeon. This one was a bit of a surprise. A great tit, yeah, which was very odd because this was actually in the Caspian Sea and it was probably 200 miles from the nearest forest. And then that was a real surprise as well because that was in the Caspian. Landed on the vessel, little tree creeper.
Yeah.
So this was possibly, this was a couple of years ago, and this was possibly, there were a lot of fires going on in the taiga in the center of Siberia. And a lot of these birds, it seems, were pushed south by the smoke and just being pushed out of the forests. And then you get things like this pigeon. We used to get pigeons quite a lot. This one was so dumb, it stayed on the boat. I think we came in and out of port 4 or 5 times and it just stayed with us. It wouldn't leave. So yeah, probably wasting your money if you're training pigeons. One of my favorite images. I don't know if anyone will be able to ID that.
Obviously some form of nightjar, but is it in Mexico, Gulf of Mexico?
It is in the Gulf of Mexico, yeah.
Is it something like whippoorwill?
Close. We did see a lot of whippoorwills. This is a chuck-will's widow.
Chuck-will's widow, yeah.
Yeah, balancing on very precariously on one of the bowsprits. This was, you know, something you see all the time. So this particular little bird stayed on the vessel for about 10 days. Can anyone ID that?
Ooh, and then do you get a bonus point for the hawk moth?
If you can ID that, yeah, sure.
Is it something like Tennessee warbler?
It is a Tennessee warbler, yeah. But what about the hawk moth? That's a hard one.
Tobacco sphinx moth?
It is a sphinx moth, yeah, very good. That moth is nearly as big as that warbler. And I just thought that was a fun picture because actually it didn't even see the moth. And when it did see the moth, eventually it didn't try and go for it. But that Tennessee warbler, it first landed right at my feet. So tired. I was on the heli deck and it literally landed underneath me. That's a hard one. That was in the Black Sea.
Is that marsh warbler?
That is a marsh warbler, yeah. And then you'll get birds that will often sort of just rest up for a little while and drink. So water sources are quite important on vessels. And there's usually some fresh water around. If we didn't have any, we'd put some out. It's a little spotted flycatcher taking a little drink there. Anyone know what this one? This was in the Gulf of Mexico.
Wilson's warbler.
Yeah, Wilson's warbler. So a lot of wood warblers. I mean, the best day I had was when we had something like, excuse me, 20 species. But again, you can see, unfortunately, there's a lot of grease and other contaminants on the boats, and you're always worried about them because they would land on these sort of pieces of equipment. They were usually okay, but it was always a bit of a concern. Again, another raptor we would see out at sea occasionally.
Osprey.
Yeah, and that they would, like the peregrines, go between the vessels looking for fishing opportunities. Now earlier you saw the swallow that was roosting. Sadly, some of the swallows were so tired that when they came off the boats in the morning, they would get snapped up. This is in the Black Sea. This is basically yellow-legged gulls just waiting for the opportunity for these birds to fly off the boat. So nature can be quite cruel in that respect. Yeah, that's the peregrine with the gallinule that I was talking about earlier. Again, not my image. Somebody I work with, Blake, managed to snap that. It was one of 2 juveniles which just spent 2 weeks terrorizing the birds on the boat. And occasionally they don't make it. We did have fatalities. Anyone ID this?
Is it cliff swallow?
Here's a cliff swallow. Yeah, this was in the States. So again, we'd record all those. And actually, when I was in Kazakhstan, it was quite important that we record them because we had a lot of vessels and we had to ensure that there wasn't too much of an impact from the vessels in terms of like birds colliding with the vessels at night. They do make it occasionally though. Okay, my friend Nicola took this image.
San Martin.
Yeah, it's a little San Martin. I can't remember what the American name is. This was in the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, Bank Martin.
That's it, yeah. So there's a few birds that were rescued over the years. Swifts and also nightjar was probably one of the best ones. Now this was a very rare bird that had never been recorded before in American waters. It's called black mockingbird. Ooh. So occasionally, this was after a massive storm, which came right the way across the Gulf of Mexico, and it deposited it from Cozumel Island onto our vessel. Yeah, so that was quite an incredible find on a boat. And then, yeah, you get them so tired sometimes. This is my friend Sam, and it landed right on his head. So I don't know how we're doing for time. Am I gone over or?
No, it's fine. Keep going. No? Yeah, loads of time. Keep going. Yep.
Okay, right. Well, this is quiz time now. So anyone can pipe up. It doesn't matter if you get it right or wrong. Bird quiz time. So just quick fire.
Do we write it down or shout it out?
Yeah, write it down. Should we write it down if you want to?
Okay.
It's up to you. So that's the first one. I'll go back and then we'll go through them. That's the second one. I'll give you a hint as to where they are. The first one was in the Gulf of Mexico. This was in the Bay of Bengal, so south of Myanmar. That's a hard one. If anyone gets that, I'll be amazed. That was in the Mozambique Channel. This was the Bay of Bengal. That I didn't actually see, rather annoyingly. I was asleep and my colleague didn't come and wake me up. I'll never forgive him for that because it disappeared before I could get to see it. But this was also in the Bay of Bengal. Okay, moving on. Mozambique Channel. Some people might be familiar with that species. So this is the east coast of Africa. Gulf of Mexico. One of many colourful little birds that dropped in. Rather stylish headwear in the Black Sea. Very tricky one. If you get this one, you're a hardcore birder. This again was, we get these in the UK, but this was in the Bay of Bengal. This was also in the Bay of Bengal. This landed about 3 feet from me while I was sitting, just enjoying a break up on the deck, top deck of this vessel. It was a dream bird, one I'd always wanted to see. Again, this is Myanmar. This followed our vessel down the Yangon River. This rather tired bird ended up on the heli deck of a vessel that I was on in the Mozambique Channel. Quite common off the coast of Myanmar. Rare bird in the UK, this one. In transitional plumage. Now that is a very tricky one. And this was, I actually wrote a paper on this, but unfortunately I lost all the data while I was in Africa. My hard drive died, but this was a bird that we discovered actually was wintering in areas that nobody knew it was wintering in. So this was in the Bay of Bengal, but we also saw some numbers in the southern Mozambique Channel. Tricky one, this flew over my head one morning in the Bay of Bengal. My favorite seabird species. This was in the Caspian Sea. Again, flew over my head. It's deceptive, that one. It's actually quite a large bird. We got a lot of these resting on the vessels in the spring and the autumn, especially the spring in the Caspian Sea. Usually not the kind of place you'd expect to see them. This is in the Gulf of Mexico. Probably about 10 miles from the coast, that one actually, just off the Alabama coast. This was in the Caspian Sea. One that we do get in the UK occasionally. The previous species, I think, has occurred in the UK. It's probably one of the best birds I ever got to see on a boat. We got a call one morning. Someone said, "Oh yes, we've got this bird. It's currently sitting at the top of our vessel." It was sitting on a radio mast, and yeah, I had to go. They said, "You've got to go and rescue it," and I said, "You've got to be joking. There's absolutely no way I'm going to pick that bird up." Oh, that's a very hard one. This was the coast of California, Southern California. It was a bird that I long wanted to see. And that's the last one in the bird quiz. So I'll go back. And if people want to shout out the answer, I'll just give the answers if we don't get it. Right. Okay, first one.
Brown thrasher.
Correct, brown thrasher. If you got brown thrasher, that was quite a surprise, but saw a couple of those out in the Gulf of Mexico. This one.
Asian paradise flycatcher.
Very good. Yep, it is indeed Asian paradise flycatcher. Not a bird you'd expect to see out at sea. This is probably the first one ever to be recorded off the coast of Myanmar. That is hard, as I said.
Is it bat hawk?
No, this is Mozambique Channel. So think of a very long distance.
The Amir falcon or something.
Sorry?
Eleonora's falcon.
Eleonora's falcon is correct. Yeah. So I was quite surprised because we were in the slap bang in the middle of the Mozambique Channel, and this bird was flying from the west coast of Africa across to Madagascar, which you tend to forget. They winter in Madagascar. Any ideas?
Is it brown shrike?
It is, yeah. Bonus points if you can tell me what form.
Pass.
It's Philippensis. So, but these are actually quite common on vessels, sort of in Southeast Asia.
Is it collared scops owl?
No, close.
Oriental?
It is Oriental Scops owl, yeah. So yeah, that was found by my colleague. We had a little crane on the back of the vessel, and this actually decided that it would be a good idea to go into the little cabin. So somebody went in to get a bottle of water, which is where we kept the water in the fridge, and this flew out and then landed on top of the crane. It's yeah, it had never been recorded. I've asked quite a few people, and I don't think anyone's ever recorded it offshore. I'm sure they do occur, but
African pied wagtail?
yep, quite a common bird in Africa.
Magnolia warbler.
Correct. Yeah. Autumn bird. That was the first time I'd ever seen one. So it was quite nice. That was the netting on the heli deck that it decided to land on. It was so tired you could get really close as well.
Hoopoe.
Yeah, hoopoe. Again, very showy bird and very, very common bird offshore. You see them quite often. I've seen them many different places.
Siberian stonechat.
It is, yeah, female.
Lanceolate warbler.
Yep, that was a dream bird of mine, and it sat 3 feet away from me, and I was gobsmacked. Still took a photo, but better than the one I saw on Shetland, which was like in a tatty field, running around like a mouse.
Is it brown-headed gull?
It is brown-headed gull, yeah. Not a very common species offshore, that actually. That's kind of why I threw it in there.
Is it black noddy?
No, it's a very, very dishevelled brown noddy, actually, in the Mozambique Channel. But I can see why you'd go for black. I think it's probably because it was a dull day, so the plumage doesn't show up very well.
Whiskered tern?
Yeah, whiskered tern.
Is it a fierce type petrel?
Yeah, it looks like a pterodroma.
It's related to them, but it's not. It looks big, doesn't it? So
Whereabouts was this one again?
So this was Bay of Bengal, and as I said, it had never been actually recorded in the Bay of Bengal. It's a bird that breeds off of the coast of Oman. If that helps. And it's got a sister species which we do get in the North Atlantic that you get off of like the Canary Islands and Madeira. So,
not flip. Is it a petrel? Is it a pterodroma?
it's not a pterodroma. It's in its own family. So it's with one other species. I'll tell you what it is anyway. It's Juanin's petrel.
Wow.
So actually, if you go to Oman and you go very close to the coast, you can see them really well. But what they tend to do is, again, it's one of those species that it only comes to deep water areas. It'll come right to the shelf edge, but it doesn't come into shallow water very often. That's what we found in Mozambique Channel and also in the Bay of Bengal. And they'd never been recorded at all in the Bay of Bengal. We recorded about 3 species of seabird that had never been recorded there before because no one goes there. So, any ideas?
Less crested tern?
No,
Fairy tern?
no, it's not a tern.
What?
Look at that tail. Usually it's much longer.
Oh, white-tailed tropic bird.
Well, it's a red-billed tropic bird, but yeah.
No.
But that just literally flew over my head, and all I had time to do was like photograph it, and then put my camera down, and then look at it, and that was the first record. I think for Bay of Bengal as well.
Eagle owl?
It is an eagle owl, yeah. Much to my annoyance, my colleague flushed that bird, so I never got a good photo. She also put one morning, told me, "Oh, I found a crake wandering around on the deck," and I was like, "Well, is it still there?" "Oh no, I threw it over the side." She'd thrown a Balon's crake over the side of the vessel. It was fine, but it wasn't the best thing to do. I had to have words with her.
Yeah, and you never got to saw it. Oh. European nightjar?
Yeah, it is European nightjar. I think it's a different race actually, but they're very common in Kazakhstan, and they have this habit of just like roosting anywhere on vessels.
Painted bunting?
Yeah. So female.
Pallid harrier?
It is a pallid harrier. Yeah, first winter. Very common bird in Kazakhstan. Much the commonest of the harriers, other than marsh harrier. Unfortunately, what we had, the project we were on, we found a lot of raptors because we were in a channel a lot of the time, which had islands that had been built, and a lot of these raptors were, rather than following the coast, they'd come out onto these islands and get a little bit lost. But there was plenty of food for them, so it wasn't all bad, including this beast.
Steppe eagle?
Yeah. So it was a juvenile steppe eagle. this bird eventually flew off. It was fine, but I later discovered that one of the guys who worked, because they were dredging here, he'd actually picked this bird up. And I was like, why did you pick it up? I said, do you not see the beak on this bird? I mean, people have like had eyes taken out by birds this large. So I then had to give a talk saying, please don't pick eagles up in future. Right. And the hardest one probably.
Is that Xanthus's murelet?
Oh, well, yeah, you get the prize. That's amazing. Yeah. So that and Guadeloupe murelet were both birds that I'd never seen before. So that was the target bird on a pelagic off of the coast of California. That's the bird quiz. I don't know if we've got time for any more. I do have a very quick marine mammal quiz, but rather than just shout them out if you think you know them. Any ideas on that?
That would be good.
Is that
This was in
striped dolphin?
Sorry?
Striped dolphin?
No, it's not
Striped.
striped. It's close though. These are quite hard, these ones, in as much as this is a very much all around in the tropical seas. This is a pan-tropical dolphin. This was in Bay of Bengal. Quite tricky, that one. But again,
Spotted dolphin?
it is a spot. Yeah, it's Atlantic spotted dolphin. So one of two species. Quite common actually in the Gulf of Mexico, but also you can see them around the Azores and also the Canary Islands. Very, very characteristic crisscross scarring on the backs of these.
Pass.
These are rissos.
Oh,
Yeah,
the fins don't look, they look really small and stubby.
it's because they're
Yeah.
low. They're low in the water. Basically, they're just floating at the surface of the water.
Right.
And another behaviour that I've never seen it in the UK, but I have seen it in tropical waters. You quite often see them in groups, just like upend, and then all you see is like this line of tails just wagging.
Right.
And it's some sort of communication or some sort of hunting device. It's a lot of behaviours that you wouldn't expect to see when you get species in other areas of the world. That's just in the North Sea. That's fairly
Common seal.
Yeah, it's common seal.
Blue whale?
No, you got to look at that. Look at that notch in the tail, and
Sperm.
no, it's a humpback.
Humpback?
Yeah, humpback. So again, like I was talking earlier about ID. A lot of the time, these have individual tail fluke patterns.
Wow.
And so there are a lot of groups around the world that regularly photograph all the whales in their area, and it'd be interesting to see in the future how far a lot of these animals will go out of their usual sort of range. This one was Indian Ocean.
Spinner?
Yeah, spinner dolphin is my favorite, I think, of all the dolphins. Oh, that's hard.
The short fin pilot.
No,
Is it orcas?
no. It's one I showed earlier, actually.
False killer whales?
No, these are pygmy sperm whales. This is another rare sighting. This was very unexpected.
Orcas?
Nope. If you look at that, this is one you get in the North Sea, actually. Mainly,
White-sided.
yeah, these are Atlantic white-sided. Very difficult, and they're very, very, like, I've only ever seen one. They're very hard to see, actually. Not very demonstrative species. That's in the North Sea.
Minky, is it?
Here's a minke, yeah, very distinctive white
Incredible.
patch. Breaching, which you hardly ever see.
Is that a northern bottlenose?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, beaked whale. One of the many beaked whale species, and again, breaching. Not my photo, I hasten to add, it's a friend's photo. But I did see that particular animal. Right,
Is that blue?
that is blue whale. And what are those things close to the?
Suckerfish.
Yeah, they are there. Yeah, remoras. So it's just ridiculous. This is the largest animal on the planet, and it has this piddly little dorsal fin. What is that all about? It's got a massive tail, but a very small dorsal fin. I've never really sort of understood. There probably is a reason for that. I'm not sure what it is. These are one of my favorite dolphins as well.
Like Hector's dolphin or something like that.
Sorry?
Is it like Hector's or Hector's dolphin?
It's called Commerson's dolphin.
Ah.
Tonino it is the Spanish. And they're declining, sadly, in Argentina quite rapidly. But they're just amazing, these little black and white bullets. We went on a trip to see these, actually. This is the only photo I got, because the guy was in a rib, and it was the most dangerous boat ride I've ever had, because he just kept spinning round and round. We nearly fell out a number of times. I think this might be the last one. This was Gulf, California. Quite tricky, but this is a Pacific white-sided dolphin. Not a great image, that. And that's it. That's the end of the quiz.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sean. That was a really fascinating feast. It really was. Thank you. I think we've time for one or two questions. If anybody would like to ask Sean anything about the birds and mammals that we've seen this evening, please fire away.
Sean, I noticed you said that I think you saw one leatherback turtle in the North Sea. Because I know in the late summer when jellyfish turn up over here, they always say that you get leatherback turtles coming into the Irish Sea, but I don't really know many people that have ever seen one. So do you know how common leatherback turtles are in British waters?
I don't think they're very common at all. I mean, certainly if they're annual, I would say, off the coast of Wales and the southwest, and probably Ireland as well. But I think a lot of it depends on currents. It depends on food source. And as you say, they're probably going to be okay in the southwestern Wales when those jellyfish come in. But the issue is if they make it as far, and it was probably the Gulf Stream that took it right up to where we saw it off the east coast of Shetland, they're probably going to struggle to find food. I think that was one of the reasons why I was there with a colleague and he'd seen it first. And we were both just quite gobsmacked, because, well, what is it doing in, the North Sea? And it was October as well, October, nearly November time, which is why I think when we took a photo, and unfortunately it had been on the surface and then it started to dive, the guy in charge of the operation was a little bit skeptical. But yeah, I don't think they're that common, Steve. I think you're very lucky if you ever see one, to be honest. Yeah, it's a once in a lifetime sort of thing in the North Sea and off the coast of the UK, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions for Sean?
Yeah, just a brief one. I was wondering if you see many interactions of birds at night around sort of artificial lights around the vessels that you're on. You're showing us some amazing pictures of birds during the day that often land on them. Have you seen sort of attractions to light at night on some of the boats?
Well, they're definitely attracted to lights at night. But I mean, what we tend to do is basically we try and encourage, when we're in the Caspian Sea, we had to encourage them to use certain types of light which would not attract the birds. Onshore, unfortunately, they had these massive floodlights which killed hundreds of birds, and I don't know why. My friend was one of the ecologists, and they tried to persuade them to change the lighting, but they wouldn't. But yeah, you do see them. I mean, I've never seen it, but you will get things like Leach's petrel, European storm petrel. But again, there are protocols in place when you do seabird surveys that if you catch these birds, you'll put them in a box and you'll wait until the appropriate time, dusk, and then release it. Because if you release it during the day, it's going to get eaten, So I think a proportion of those birds that we see on vessels during the day are probably pulled in by the light. And we did get collisions. I've seen quail, unfortunately, that have hit the sides of boats. But but not as many, thankfully, as you would maybe think, you know. So
interesting. And with the like European and Leacher storm petrels, were they? Can you remember if they were like in the autumn period, sort of like would they be, you know, young birds, fledglings?
well, actually, somebody I know has just been on she's on a cruise at the moment. This is going down towards the Canary Islands, and it was a young bird. This is in the winter. So, but I think most of them tend to be inexperienced birds that come to light. Yeah. So definitely. I mean, I've actually seen a picture that I didn't see this, but when I was working for one company, they were off the coast of South America, and they had a bin on the back of the vessel, and there was a prion that had managed to come in, and it was in the bin. So it just literally picked this prion out of the bin, and they didn't know what it was, you know. So then you get asked all kinds of crazy questions like, what do I do with this bird? So yeah, I think now, certainly we try and educate people to try and prevent that from happening, you know. So yeah.
Cheers.
Well, thanks for that interesting question, Ben, and thanks for yours, Steve, and also for helping us out with all the answers to those many tricky questions. You see why Steve is our mastermind, our bird group mastermind, Sean.
Yeah, indeed.
Indeed.
Yeah. I know his knowledge is very extensive. So
I think one of the things that's really come over from your talk tonight, Sean, is expect the unexpected. What a surprise list of birds you showed us there. It was a phenomenal range and just gave us so much insight into migration and to bird behavior over the oceans. I learned so much from it. There's some great images. I don't know how you had the time to spot the birds, take pictures, and then have a look at them through your bins and remember each one intimately. What really came over tonight was your intimate identification skills, not just what species it is, even if it was totally unexpected, but what sex, what age, all came over so clearly. You've honed tremendous field skills, and that is so often underrated by science in general and by the public at large. This takes years of amassing and is something that is individually unique. And you've carved out an ability there, which I think is mastered by very few. I know one person who would have so enjoyed your talk this evening. Sadly, he's no longer with us. His name was Peter Hope Jones, and he was one of the people that established the bird group almost 70 years ago at Bangor University's Ornithological Society. And Peter Hope Jones masterminded and pioneered a lot of seabird monitoring of birds, mainly in the North Sea. And many of the protocols that he established then are still used today. He would have loved it, both for your skill of identification and your understanding of what the birds were doing. It's fabulous that the things that he started off doing then are continued globally now and yield so much fabulous new information and really important information in terms of conservation and just having a greater understanding and degree of awe about the movement and behavior of birds. I love some of the particular things you showed us about birds catching flying fish, for example, and raptors being associated with your boats, which I hadn't thought of. How cattle egrets might have benefited from boats in terms of range expansion. But on the other hand, you also pointed out some of the downsides to our activities at sea, particularly for cetaceans. And thank you very much for including those. So much a part of your survey work, I know, and so appealing and so mysterious. Not only we had a feast of birds, but a feast of cetaceans tonight. And I'm quite sure there's never been a single talk that we've received that has covered such a breadth of species of oceanic birds in an hour or so. That you've got to grips with so many over the years that you've been doing it and over such a wide range of oceans is a great credit to you. And you put it all together brilliantly tonight. We really felt at times we were with you there on the boat watching them because the first-hand descriptions you gave of them really harked back to those original moments when you would have seen them, and that's very special. So thank you for engaging with us so intimately and so informatively this evening. I hope you give that talk to many other groups here in Britain, but also just as importantly abroad, where their conservation really matters, where you're at the cutting edge for these species and for the developments of the oceans of the world. We wish you luck. I know you're land-based now and doing an equally important job, but I think the more you can give that talk, the greater your long-term legacy of ocean wandering will be. Good luck to you with that. And thank you once again on behalf of all of the group for giving your time for us this evening. It's been a great pleasure, really rewarding, and definitely equal to watching Winter Watch. Thank you ever so much.
No, no problem. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, no worries.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate it.